The Canon 1500D, or Rebel T7 as it is called in some countries, is one of Canon's most affordable camera offerings. It is a DSLR camera that has a 24.1 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor, and if you buy it in this configuration, it comes with an 18 to 55mm f3.5 to 5.6 lens. This is a full frame equivalent of roughly around 28 to 90mm. Alright, so let's first get started with a very quick unboxing. There you get a camera strap, which I really like, the manual, and as you can see here, there's a few different names for this camera. 1500D is what it's called in Australia, Rebel T7 I believe is what it's called in the US, and KISS X90, I'm not sure where that comes from, but yeah, there's the manual. Some more paperwork here. That there looks like the battery. Some cables here, that's the plug for the adapter to charge it. This right here is the body of the camera. Very, very lightweight. This right here is the lens that it comes with, so it's the 18 to 55mm. And then here we'll have the actual battery charger, so the battery will sit in there and charge. So that's about it for the quick unboxing. Let's get back to the review. Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is Michael and I'm a professional photographer, which may seem odd as to why I'm reviewing a really cheap camera. Now, some bit of context here is that I teach an online photography course. If you're interested in that, there's a link in the description below. But probably one of the #1 questions I get is what camera someone should buy as a beginner. Now, obviously this completely depends on where in the world they are. There's different offerings in different parts of the world, but it also depends on their budget. Now, some people have a huge budget when they're beginning and I'll recommend them something else, but some people have a quite small budget. So that's where this camera right here comes in. It's the Canon 1500D, that's what it's called in Australia, also known as the Rebel T7, I believe in other countries. And it comes in Australian dollars at about $600 to $700, which I believe is around $300 US. So extremely cheap, especially considering you get a lens with it. So you get the 18 to 55mm lens, which is the f3.5 to 5.6. That just means when you're at the widest point of 18, you're f3.5, and as you slowly zoom in, the aperture will start closing down to that 5.6 mark. Now, the reason I suggest this camera to beginners with a small budget is because it's very good for the price, and you get a lens with it. One thing I always stress is that lenses are more important than the body. So even if you start off with a camera just like this, you can start buying nicer lenses, more expensive lenses, and still use them on this body, and then upgrade the body when you've got a little bit more money, because the lenses probably are the most important thing when it comes to image quality and things like that. So that's why I'm reviewing this camera. I highly recommend it for beginners with a low budget. It just does everything it needs to do. The image quality is pretty good, and in this review I'm going to put up some images towards the end to show what they look like. That's just with this lens. Like I said, it's a kit lens. Kit lenses aren't always the best. So yeah, as I said, I suggest someone, if they do buy this, they slowly upgrade lenses, and it does use a Canon EF or EFS system, meaning that as long as you stick with the APS-C line of Canon cameras, which a lot of them are, you can use all those same lenses. Even on Canon full frame, you can still use the lenses, but there will be some cropping. So firstly, I'll talk about a few things that I really like about this camera. One, it's lightweight. That may be a pro or a con for some people. I personally prefer not really heavy cameras, but cameras with a little bit more weight. It just helps you to hold them a little bit more stable, but it's very, very lightweight. A lot of people doing my course are a bit older, so they don't want really heavy equipment, either in their backpack or when they're carrying it or when they're taking photos. So it's very, very lightweight. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with the lens. So if you do start upgrading lenses, better lenses usually are a little bit heavier, so just keep that in mind. It has full controls, just like most cameras do, so you can put it in manual, you can change your ISO, aperture, shutter speed, all those types of things. It also has auto mode, so if you're not comfortable with changing settings manually, you can just shoot completely auto, and it does a pretty good job of that. It also shoots video. The maximum resolution for that is 1080p, which, as I said, for the price point is pretty damn good. And let's just talk about the ports on the camera. So I'll just open the side here. The first one there, it looks like it's for remote. So if you have a remote intervalometer or just a remote shutter trigger, something like that, that's what that's for. The second one is the mini or micro USB, I can't remember which one that is. That's just in case you don't want to take your SD card out to load your images onto your computer. You can just get them straight off the camera using a plug. It doesn't come with the camera, you'll have to buy a cable, but they're easy to find and they're very cheap. Next thing is a HDMI out. So if you want to run the camera into a monitor or TV, something like that, you can do that as well. It has a hot shoe on the top there, so you can attach flashes and accessories like that. And it also has a built-in flash, which I'll pop up for you right now. Built-in flash, which I never really recommend anyone uses. I prefer off-camera flashes. But you know, if you're stuck or you just can't afford one, there's a flash there for those low light situations. Now, In terms of image quality, I'm actually pretty impressed with this. I've used it quite a bit. I've done quite a few giveaways with these throughout my course as well, and I've got a few exciting videos coming up using this camera. But image quality is pretty spectacular considering the price point. It's better than a lot of high-end DSLRs were 10 or 15 years ago. And like I said, I'm going to put some images up towards the end of this review, and video as well. It does video, which is awesome as well. A lot of cheaper cameras don't even do video, or if they do, it's really poor quality. I found with this, it does a decent job of video. It struggles with autofocus a little bit, and that's in video and photo mode. And I wouldn't say that it struggles, I'd just say that it's slow. And now I'm coming from a Sony a7 IV, that's what I use. It's a much more expensive camera than this, where it's lightning fast autofocus, it's very precise. Whereas this, it is a little bit slower and it sometimes misses the mark. But as I said, as I keep saying, it is a much cheaper camera and is fantastic for a beginner just because of the price point. Now, another thing is the battery life is absolutely amazing because it's a DSLR. Mirrorless cameras use a lot more battery power because they're powering a screen the whole time, whereas DSLRs usually are better with battery life, and this is no exception. It's really good for battery life. The other good thing that's an advantage for people who are on a budget is that the file sizes are smaller compared to my Sony or something like that. They're much easier to edit, especially on PCs or Macs, whatever computer you have that may not have a lot of power. You'll still be able to edit your images on an older or slower computer or laptop. Whereas my Sony, it needs a bit of computing power to push some of those raw files around. Especially when you're dealing with video, 4K and things like that. You do need a decent computer when it comes to that. So that's another advantage of this. If you're a beginner or you have a really low budget, an old computer, they work hand in hand. You don't need a crazy computer to edit the files out of this camera, which is another thing that I really like. So probably a couple of cons with this camera that I will say, and just keep in mind the price of this camera, so I'm not being harsh, I'm just being honest. The screen isn't articulating, so the screen's just stuck on the back like that. You can't flip it out, you can't angle it and things like that. So it can get a little bit frustrating if, let's say for example, you're on a tripod and you're trying to tilt the camera up, you really have to get underneath it to see what you're doing rather than pop a screen out to see what you're doing. But that's common on a lot of cameras at this price point, even more expensive cameras. My last camera, the Sony a7 III, I have a 4 now, but it was the 3. The screen would only tilt back and forward, which was kind of annoying for a camera at that price point, whereas the Sony a7 IV is fully articulating, so it pops out to the side and it can rotate back and forth as well. So that's one of the downsides. The other downside, which is common again with a lot of cheaper cameras, it's actually common with a lot of pro cameras too, but there's only one like wheel that you can turn for shutter, aperture and ISO. So you kind of have to go into the quick menu and then jump over to whichever setting you want to change, if it's ISO, shutter speed or aperture, and then turn the dial. Whereas my Sony camera, it has 3 dials that I can adjust all 3 of those settings all at once. So I can hold my camera with one hand and literally adjust my shutter, ISO and aperture really quickly. So it does take a bit longer to find your settings with this camera, but once you get the hang of it, it's really fast anyway. But as I said, that's the price point of this camera. You can't complain too much. Another thing that this has actually that's pretty cool is live view. So that means you can kind of use it like a mirrorless camera, and instead of looking through the optical viewfinder, you can actually flick it to live view, which will show you what you're looking at on the back of the screen. And what I mean by live view is that as you change your settings, you'll see the image change on the back of the screen, like a mirrorless camera. Whereas if you don't have it in live view, you're just looking directly through the lens. So any changes you make to your settings, you won't see them until you take the photo. You just have a light meter at the bottom that tells you if you're underexposed or overexposed or perfectly exposed. Whereas in live view, like I said, you can see the settings as you change them. So that's handy as well. I think a lot of cameras have that now. I've had mirrorless cameras for quite a number of years now. So a lot of the stuff with DSLRs is lost on me. I don't know how common it is for most DSLRs these days have live view. I'm sure it's pretty common. I remember my 60D or 70D had that, and that was many years ago, 10 or 15 years ago, I think. So I think it's been a thing for a while, but just to see a camera this cheap that has it is pretty cool. So that's another thing I like about this. And that's about it. Probably to sum up, it has Wi-Fi and things like that as well, so you can transfer your images directly to your phone. So that's also handy for people who may not have computers or don't use Lightroom or Photoshop to edit. You can just edit them on your phone in those apps that you can get, like Snapseed. A lot of phones now have built-in photo editors in them as well, so that's good. And you can also use it as a remote shutter, so you can use your phone to trigger the shutter on the camera, which is cool too. So that about sums it up. It's not an overly technical review where I'm going over every little detail of the camera, just kind of what I think of it. And for the price, I think it's absolutely unbeatable. One more thing that I'll say is, when I do often get approached by beginners or people with low budgets asking for a camera recommendation, it probably is better to buy a secondhand camera because for the same price, you'll probably get a much better camera and maybe some lenses. I've seen some really good packages with Canon 60Ds with 2 or 3 lenses and a bag and things like that for a similar price to what this is. But a lot of the people who ask me that want a brand new camera. So if you want brand new, I think this is one of the best choices out there. It's one of the big brands, it's a Canon, so you know you're in good hands. And in my experience, it's been a fantastic camera. As I said, I do have some videos coming up with this. We're gonna have a bit of fun with this. And yeah, so subscribe if you're not already to check out those videos when they do come out. But other than that, I'm gonna put up the test video now from this camera footage, and then I'll put some photos up at the end. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Now, because this camera only shoots at a maximum resolution of 1080p and the video you're watching is 4K, I have upscaled the 1080p footage to 4K, so it may not look as good as it usually does at its natural scale.